To watch Sunday afternoons is always a rough time slot because after following Rob's talk and then everyone's got full bellies and stuff and it's nice and hot in here, so you guys don't stand a chance. So I'll try and make this quick and uh, painless, but I just wanted to have a little bit of a Bible study this afternoon on the miracles of Jesus. I was watching this, like clip of a Q&A and someone asked the question, when Jesus healed the blind man, why didn't he need to spit and make clay to anoint his eyes? Why didn't he just command him to be healed and make it happen and stuff? So I'm like, that's a very good question, and why I did. So I kind of went down the rabbit hole and looking at some examples of Jesus working miracles to try and answer that question. So we'll just start in John chapter 9 and verse 1. That would be helpful if I turn there myself. Okay, starting in verse 1. Now, as Jesus passed by, he saw a man who was blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, saying, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? And Jesus answered, Neither this man nor his parents sinned, but that the works of God should be revealed in him. I must work by the works of him who sent me while it is day. The night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. And when he had said these things, he spat on the ground, made clay with the saliva, and heated the eyes of the blind man with the clay. And he said to him, Go wash in the pool of Siloam, which is translated sent. So he went and washed and came back seeing. Therefore, the neighbors and those who previously had seen that he was blind said, Is it not? Is not this he who sat and begged? And some said, This is he. Others said, He is like him. And he said, I am he. Therefore they said to him, How were your eyes opened? And he answered and said, A man called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes and said to me, Go to the pool of Siloam and wash. So I went and washed, and I received sight. So here, an amazing testimony of the blind man um, who was given his sight. And first the disciples asked the question, like, why was he afflicted? Who did he sin or his parents? And he's like, just just because something bad happened to you doesn't mean you sinned or something bad happened as a punishment. But you can have bad things happen to you as an opportunity to witness the Lord's power. So that was like one aspect. And then I was looking at um, the significance of making the clay with his spit, and I'll kind of come back to that. But there's a couple more examples I want to look at first. Um, Mark chapter 10. We'll go back to. Mark chapter 10, and we'll start in verse 46. Now they came to Jericho. As he went out of Jericho with his disciples and a great multitude, blind Bartimaeus, the son of Timaeus, sat by the road begging. I just like to. How's that for a name, being blind Bartimaeus? And when he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to cry out and say, Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. Then many warned him to be quiet, but he cried out all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. So Jesus stood still and commanded him to be called. Then they called the blind man, saying to him, Be of good cheer, rise, he is calling you. And throwing aside his garment, he rose and came to Jesus. So Jesus answered, said to him, "What do you want me to do for you?" The blind man said to him, "Rabboni, that may receive my sight." Then Jesus said to him, "Go your way, your faith has made you well." And immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus on the road. So we'll just keep that example in mind, and then we'll go have a look at another one, Matthew chapter 9. Matthew chapter 9, and we'll start off in verse 27. When Jesus departed from there, two blind men followed him, crying out and saying, "Son of David, have mercy on us." And when he had come into the house, the blind men came to him, and Jesus said to them, "Do you believe that I am able to do this?" And they said to him, "Yes, Lord." Then he touched their eyes, saying, "According to your faith, let it be, let it be to you." And their eyes were opened, and Jesus sternly warned them, saying, "See that no one knows it." But when they had departed, they had spread the news about him in all that country. So the thing that stood out to me with the latter two examples were those were both people that knew Jesus and had heard of his power, and they already believed that he could heal them. Like, they already had the faith. So when they spoke to Jesus, they already expected him to work a miracle. So that's all Jesus had to do, is say, be healed, and they received their sight. And so he's you know performing miracles for those who already knew of his power, and were just, all they needed was the opportunity to see him and talk to him. But we'll go back to John chapter 9. So the why this example kind of stands out to me, what I get from that is, um, when they approached the blind man, he wasn't like that we know of, and it could be, but it doesn't say specifically in the word. He wasn't, didn't know about Jesus, or he wasn't, begging for a healing or trying to seek him. He was just someone they came across who the disciples had a question about, and Jesus, used that example, used that opportunity to perform a miracle. And sure, he could have just said to the blind guy, "Hey, blind, be healed and go about your things," but there was more to it than that, so that not only the person who was healed, but those around him could see that Jesus's power was of the Lord. And so he made the clay out of his spit. And I guess what stood out to me is that God created Adam from the dust of the earth. So almost like Jesus was taking some clay of the dust of the earth and putting his spit into it to make the clay. It was kind of like putting God's spirit in it and anointing his eyes. Is kind of like adding to the blind man the parts of him that were deficient, with the spirit of God involved, kind of like he was giving back his sight with the physical act of anointing them with the clay. And then after he went and washed, he had his sight. And it's kind of like us being humans are made of clay, but Jesus put his spirit inside of us. And so, just not only was it a miracle, but just the physical act was a lesson that non-believers could see something physical that Jesus did. Because if he had just said be blind or be healed and stuff, there's lots of explanations they could come up with. But being able to see something tangible as a non-believer is like the manifestation of the power of God. So I was like kind of looking into that, and I thought that was really amazing, like why specifically he did that with the spit and the clay. And then we'll go down to look at another kind of healing example, um, Matthew chapter 8. Okay, starting in Matthew chapter 8, verse 1. When he had come down from the mountain, a great multitudes followed him. And behold, a leper came and worshipped him, saying, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. Then Jesus put his hand and touched him, saying, I am willing, be cleansed immediately. Be cleansed. Immediately his leprosy was cleansed, and Jesus said to him, See that you tell no one, but go your way, show yourself to the priest, and offer the gift that Moses commanded as a testimony to them. And then reading on, now when Jesus had entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him, pleading with him, saying, Lord, my servant is lying at home paralyzed, dreadfully tormented. And Jesus said to him, I will come and heal him. And the centurion answered and said to him, Lord, I am not worthy that you should come under my roof, but only speak a word, and my servant will be healed. For I also am a man under authority, having soldiers under me, and I say to this one, Go, and he goes, and to another, Come, and he comes, and to my servant, Do this, and he does it. When Jesus heard it, he marveled and said to those who followed, Assuredly I say to you, I have not found such great faith, not even in Israel. And I say to you that many will come from east and west and sit down with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the sons of the kingdom will be cast out into outer darkness. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then Jesus said to the centurion, Go your way, and as you have believed, so let it be done for you. And his servant was healed the same hour. So again, we have two examples of people that came to Jesus with a healing need, already believing that it was possible. And especially with the centurion servant, it's interesting that it says that Jesus marveled at his faith, that like he didn't the centurion like Jesus didn't even need to see his servant. He had the belief that all Jesus had to do was just to speak it and it would be done. And that's such an amazing reminder of us, that for us, that we have that same power in us. We have even more so than the centurion, because we have God's spirit inside of us. We just need to know in our hearts and believe that these things are possible. So it's always good to be reminded of that. Now let's move to Mark chapter 7. Mark chapter 7, verse 32. There we go. Then they brought to him one who was deaf and had an impediment in his speech, and they begged him to put his hand on him. And he took him aside from the multitudes and put his fingers in his ears, and he spat and touched his tongue. Then looking up to heaven, he sighed and said to him, Ephphatha, the Ephphatha, that is, be opened. I have to practice on my Hebrew and my Greek. Immediately his ears were opened, and the impediment of his tongue was loosed, and he spoke plainly. Then he commanded them that they should tell no one, but the more he commanded them, the more widely they proclaimed it. And then they were astonished beyond measure, saying, He has done all the things well. He makes both the deaf to hear and the mute to speak. And so we have another example of, Jesus adding a physical element to his to the healing. And I think from the perspective of the it was a deaf mute. He might not have known what was going on, but he could see and feel that Jesus did something to him, and then he received his hearing and his sight. And so besides getting his senses restored, he knows that this is a miracle from Jesus worked through the power of God, and not some other some other like trick or something that could be explained away, but just the fact that it's the healings kind of differentiated from someone who came to Jesus fully believing that he could do the miracle versus someone who maybe didn't know much about it or wasn't sure what was going on, but having that example to show to others exactly what he could do. Okay, I've got one more example here, and this is like, man, you could almost do a whole talk on this by itself, but we'll go to John chapter 2. John chapter 2 and verse 1. On the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Now, both Jesus and his disciples were invited to the wedding. And when they ran out of wine, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does your concern have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Whatever he says to do, you do it." Now there were set there Now there were set there 6 water pots of stone, according to the manner of purification of the Jews, containing 20 or 30 gallons apiece. Jesus said to them, "Fill the water pots with water," and they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, "Draw some out now and take it to the master of the feast." And they took it. When the master of the feast had tasted the water that was made wine, and did not know where it came from, but the servants who had drawn the water knew, the master of the feast called to the bridegroom and said to him, "Every man at the beginning sets out the good wine, and when the guests have well drunk, then the inferior. You have kept the good wine until now." Then, verse 11, this is the beginning of the signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee, and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. So I went down the rabbit hole on this. There's this is actually such an amazing miracle. It's not just simply turning water into wine. First and foremost, when they it doesn't explicitly say that Jesus turned the water into wine. He just had the servants fill the stone pots up with water, and then just take a scoop and give it to the master of the master of the feast. And he immediately said, "Man, you guys saved the best wine till last." And as far as the servants know, they just gave him a spoonful of water. But for it to be differentiated between like the good wine and the bad wine, well, like you want to say, the good wine and the cheap wine, it's like good wine had to be like well aged, it had to be cured and stuff, and there's a whole process to make it. Um, but the fact that it was stored in the stone pots, the stone water pots are terrible storage jars for wine. So you absolutely would not get good wine out of a stone pot, because what made it good for water makes it terrible for wine. And like bulk wine, would have been like stored in wine skins, or if you had a lot, there were ceramic pots called amphorae that were lined with beeswax, and they were like sealed up so you can't it won't let any air in there. So the fact that you had like this amazing good wine come out of these stone pots just shows that it's a blessing of the Lord, that um it's like a physical impossibility, and yet it happened. And then also, um it's like symbolic. You have the stone pots just filled with water, and then after Jesus worked his miracle in them, they had the good wine in them. It's kind of like our body is the vessel. Before we receive the Holy Spirit, we just got water inside of us, but then after Jesus works his miracle in us, we have the good wine inside of us. We have Jesus' blessing inside of us. There's just so much more to that than just simply turning water into wine, and you know what what the implications of how Jesus went about it, and having the crowd that didn't know what was going on in the background, confirm the miracle that just happened, that you can have this really good wine that would have taken years to age, and it was just scooped straight out of a stone pot and put straight in the glass. So anyway, I'd just like to leave those thoughts there, and yeah, hand over back to Brother